perhaps let's try the next one. Promise. Is there a promise here?
Verse 5. The land he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey. That's a promise from God to you, Israelites.
Yes. The actual promise is in Genesis chapter 15. Right? But here is reference back to the Genesis 15 promise. God promised a land for the Jews that will be flowing with milk and honey. Flowing with milk and honey means a land that is rich and abundant. Okay, so today you can still use that as an expression. I'm going to a land called Canada. It's flowing with milk and honey, even though the milk is frozen half the time. Okay, so frozen milk is still milk, right? You can call it. Land flowing with milk and honey, it's a prosperous place. So God promised them a land that will be theirs and that will be abundant. So that's a promise. What's another promise that you think could be in here? The snow can make maple syrup.
Instead of milk and honey, it's snow and maple syrup.
Snow and maple syrup, yeah. Any other promise you see here?
Got the colors right.
11. What about 11? What's the promise there? Yeah, the promise of the land. The promise of the land. So you might say, well, but that's the promise to the Jews. It's not a promise to me. God is not saying that when you see a piece of land in Canada, you put a flag on it and say, this is mine. Bam! So sometimes there may be a promise, but it's not a promise to me, it's the promise to the Jews. But can you read a promise to yourself? Not always, in the sense that not every promise to the Jews is a promise to us. Okay? So we must try not to overread the passage. But just like I was sharing earlier on, a promise to Joshua may well be in a particular situation be a promise to me. Not that I'm overreading it, but just that at that moment when I needed some comfort from God, God gave me the exact passage. So perhaps one fine day you might be in a situation where you've saved up some money and you want to buy a house and you're praying whether you should, and just at that moment God gives you this verse, or some pastor preaches the verse, you might say, okay, that's a promise to me, yeah. It may well be, but just be careful not to overread it. If you hear something like that and you're not sure whether you're overreading, go ask a friend. Ask a brother or sister, or ask a pastor and say, Pastor, do you think I'm overreading this passage? Do you think I can claim this as a promise to me right now? Okay, but I think there's an implied promise here. There's an implied promise from this whole passage. Indirect promise. What do you think is the indirect promise? That God will provide. It's an indirect promise because He provided for the Jews, so He will provide for me. Yeah. What's another indirect promise? That He will deliver on His promises. Even if it takes 430 years, right? You have been reading, it took God 430 years. But then it wasn't because God was waiting, because in Genesis 15, as I pointed out to you, God already said to Abraham, your descendant will have to wait 400 years. So He did tell them. So it was already part of His plan. It wasn't too late. It was on time. So God does promise, and even if the promise takes a long time sometimes, and we forget, and we think He forgets, He doesn't forget. He will deliver on His promise. So that's an indirect promise, that God will deliver on His promises. He will never break His promise. Indirect example to follow is, therefore, I should never break my promises. I think we often do, and we hurt friends and we hurt family when we do that. We often do. But God doesn't. Okay, action.
consecrate to me every firstborn.
Yeah, verses 2 and 12, consecrate to me every firstborn. Okay, consecrate to me every firstborn. When my daughter was born, she's my firstborn, my only born, but it's my firstborn. We dedicated her to God. Okay, so we can still do it literally. You can dedicate your firstborn to God. God used this child as you wish, as you will, as you plan. Okay?
What happens when the parents decide to consecrate a child, but the child decides not to go in a way that...
I think when we dedicate to God, we just have to trust that God will deliver, that God will, at His own time, bring it about. And yeah, I'm still waiting to see what God is still giving my daughter to do. But I'm encouraged by the fact that my own pastor's father, he's the first. My pastor is the firstborn. His father, when his firstborn was born, his father dedicated the firstborn to God. And the firstborn, it was his most brilliant son. He had 5 sons. He didn't have 6.
No priest then.
The first one is a priest. He didn't need the 6. So he dedicated the first son to God. And the first son indeed has been a pastor. Even though he's the most brilliant of the family, he could have been anything he wanted. Second son is the doctor. Third son is a mission. Yeah, third son missionary. Yeah, so fourth son architect. So yeah, almost there. Yes.
I see an action here about remembering God, and he went with the the front nuts and all that kind of stuff. But to communicate to the next generation, purposely, deliberately communicate to the next generation what God has done.
Yeah. In verse 14, in days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean, say to him and explain to him why we are doing this, why we are celebrating the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, why we are wearing the frontlet on the front of our heads and all that sort of thing. You tell the story of God's action in your life to your next generation. And the Hebrew people are storytellers, and the whole Old Testament, a lot of it's story. We modern people were not storytellers. We like to have principles. The teacher comes out and principle number 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas the Hebrews tell stories. And many cultures in the world today still tell stories. They teach by telling stories. Yeah. And we know the Greeks told stories like Aesop, the rabbit and the hare, the crow who dropped rocks into a pitcher. You know that story? There was a crow who was very thirsty, and he couldn't find any water, but the only water he could find was in a pitcher that was narrow neck like that. So he saw the water at the bottom. He says, how do I get the water? And his beak went in, and it was just like that. So he says, oh dear, how do I get? This is the thing. So how do I get the water?
Putting stones.
So he picked up stones and he dropped the stones in there, and as the stones collected, the water came up, and finally he could drink. So what's the story? What's the lesson of the story?
Pick up a small stone.
Learn to pick stones. What's the story? What's the lesson of the story?
Find the solutions.
Find your
for your
solutions. Be creative in your solution. Yeah, maybe. What else? Persistence. Even if you can't get something, keep working at it. Work at it slowly. Slowly, the water will rise, and then you will be able to drink. So be persistent. Don't give up. Okay, that would probably be the best lesson there. Yeah. So when you teach by a story, the listener engages with the story. He will remember the story, and he will remember the lesson. Right. So tell stories to your children about what God has done in your life. And of course, you write them down in your journal, right? So next time your children can also read, oh, Papa did this, and this is what God did for him. Okay?
We did this among ourselves by sharing testimony.
Yes.
Right.
And here in Mint, we try and encourage one another to tell stories how God has touched my life, and that will encourage others to trust that God will touch their lives too. Yeah. So yeah, that's telling testimonies, telling stories. What else?
Verse 3 talks about the celebration,
Mhm.
celebrate what the Lord to us,
Mhm.
blessings.
Yeah. So celebrate, remember, commemorate that's the meaning of commemorate, celebrate and remember the day you came out of Egypt. So we do not literally come out of Egypt, but we will remember the day we left sin to follow God. That's our Egypt. Our sin is our Egypt. And God, Jesus delivered us from our sin. So we can commemorate that day, the day we were spiritually reborn, the day we were baptized, whatever. These are to remember what God has done in our lives, the start of a new life. Okay, and of course, we commemorate the birth of Jesus, right? So that's what Christmas is all about. We commemorate the birth of Jesus, who was born so that we will not die a spiritual death. Okay, so commemorate, that's an action to take. Right, example. Do you see any examples? I see a very big example at the end of the passage, at the end of the chapter. Very, very, very good example.
Is that Joseph?
Joseph. Yeah, what was Joseph an example of?
Joseph believed in God, so he believed God eventually will come to the aid of the Israelites and bring Israelites out of the Egypt. So he really believed in God.
Yes.
So, and he's obedient.
What was the demonstration of his belief? How did he demonstrate his belief?
He told the Israelites that God will surely come to your aid and make sure you carry my bone out of Egypt with you.
Now, we read the story of Joseph in Genesis, and in Genesis chapter 50 last week, we looked at the end of Genesis 50, right? And Joseph said to his brothers in verse 24, I'm about to die, and then he says, promise to me that when I die, keep my bones. One day we will leave Egypt. When we do so, carry my bones back to the promised land. Even though they were doing well in Egypt, even though he had been the prime minister of Egypt, the second most important man in Egypt, he knew that Egypt was not where they were meant to be forever. But he remembered, I'm sure Abraham was his ancestor, the story would have come down to him that the Jews were meant to be only 400 years away from the promised land, and then they will go back. And so Joseph had faith that God would deliver on his promise, and he made his brothers swear that the descendants of Israel would carry the bones back when they leave Egypt. So that's a picture of faith and is an example for us to follow, no matter how impossible it seems to be. Any other examples? And so he said, it can be example to follow or example to avoid. Right here, so you get an overlap, right? Pharaoh is an example to avoid. We should not disobey God. We should not be stubborn and refuse to accept that God is concerned about our behavior and our words. 21, yes. What about 21?
By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day.
A good example of Israel, they looked to God for guidance. So God gave them guidance, and because they were looking, they could see. If you say, it's just a cloud, forget it, I'm not going to look at it, then you won't follow. So they were obedient, they saw God leading and they followed as God led. And actually, if you have been following the story, you realize that God didn't seem to lead them down the obvious journey. There was this obvious short road from Egypt to Israel, right? If you remember, I drew you this sort of a sketch, and this is Egypt on this side here, and then Canaan, the promised land here. This is the Sinai Peninsula, and they were here, Goshen. The shortest road is the straight one, but God led them something like this. That last part was their own fault. This last part, they were wandering around for 40 years in the desert. But at least this part didn't look very obvious. Right?
There, that's the Mediterranean Sea.
Mediterranean Sea here. This is the Red Sea here. Yeah, the Red Sea is here. The Red Sea is a kind of two channels. This is the Gulf of Aqaba, right, and the Suez Canal here. So they had a kind of a detour, and it looks very stupid. Why? Number one, this part here is all desert, and you wouldn't want to walk through the desert to go to this promised land, go through the desert to get there. It's like touching my nose this way, eh? I can't imagine. Just yeah. So it didn't look very obvious, didn't look very logical. But God led and they followed. And actually there was also a river, right? Lakes and rivers on this side. And so they should have gone over that rather than through it. And because God showed them the way, they followed.
Is that possible? God purposely did them into a lot of battle, try to equip them. That's the reason they can survive in the promised land.
In fact, we are told here in verse 17, isn't it? Because God says if they take that short road through the Philistine country, they would face war. And then they might change their minds and say, this is too hard, this is too hard, I'm going back. I'm not going to get my PhD, I'm going home. In fact, it was very tough for me. The fact that God promised me a cross, I struggled through my PhD, it was really tough, but I said I will go through. I was prepared, actually, whatever happens, maybe I won't get my PhD even. Yeah. Anyway, so you have this road, the straight road. As I said, this is Highway 401 for them. Egypt needed to get through that road. They would defend it very strongly. There will be forts all along the way. It's a very important highway, so they would have their army stationed at every so often on this road. Imagine then the Israelites fighting the battle. Every 3 steps they fight a battle. Every 3 steps. After the 70th step they walk back. Okay, surrender. Yeah. So God didn't want them to take the short route because it was not wise. They were hardly prepared for war. They were slaves. They may be strong physically, but they're not going to fight a war. They are not trained for war. Okay. So God did introduce war to them because along the way they would meet enemies, but one enemy at a time. Small enemy first, and then bigger and bigger, and then they get more confidence. Yeah? Okay. Now, so that's one example of listening to God and following His guidance, even if it looks rather stupid, even if it looks very illogical from a human point of view. And it's tough.
Can I suggest that
Yes.
for verse 21 and 22, for New Testament Christians like us, the pillar of cloud in the night, and of course the light is the word of God.
Yes.
Because the book of Psalms that says, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. So light is equivalent to word, and that means to follow the example means we read the word, study the word,
Yeah.
so that the word can be our guidance, just like it guided the Israelites.
See, Jesus says in Matthew 4:4, Matthew chapter 4, verse 4, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, the Bible itself, it's our guide. It is our manual. Imagine if you were to buy a car, a Toyota, you read the Toyota manual. I know young people nowadays don't read the manual. The first day they get an iPhone, they know how to operate it. They are born with an iPhone. They don't need to read the manual, but for most of us, we still have to read manuals. So can you imagine you have a car, it's a Toyota, and you read the Mercedes manual? You don't, right? You don't read the wrong manual too. You read the right manual, but you must read the manual. Otherwise, if the car breaks down, you don't know what to do. In fact, it may not break down if you have driven it properly the way the manual tells you. Okay, so read the manual. Read the Word of God.
Before you drive.
At least when there's a problem, you read the manual. Yeah?
Drivers, anything problem, and we read the manual.
Well, no, but don't drive like this. Read the manual. That's not the way you're supposed to read. Yeah. Okay.
What's the meaning of
Pillar.
pillar?
Pillar.
What does that mean?
Okay, what happens is,
Cloud.
yeah. See, there was a cloud. A pillar is something like this that supports a roof, right? So this is a pillar.
So the sheep.
So the cloud, it was a cloud in the shape of a pillar.
Sheep of the pillar.
Yeah. So it's a cloud, and then inside there, there's probably light. So at night, it lights up. There's a fire inside there. At night, it lights up. So a pillar of fire at night, and a pillar of cloud in the daytime.
You can see the clouds in the summertime, especially. They're pillars of clouds that we have. And that would be, maybe that's a good visual for you. This big, tall, we call them cumulus clouds. They have a flat bottom and they go all fluffy and straight up and they go very, very high. So God led them with a pillar of this cloud before them. So they go. And out in the desert, it's dry. There's no clouds anywhere. So this would be a strange looking thing. This great big cloud in this very, very dry area. So boy, I know where we're going. Yeah.
Like a hurricane. Yeah. So it's a cloud like that, so it looks like a pillar.
Yeah.
The passage doesn't say the altitude or height.
It doesn't say how long or how high or how low. Yeah, it doesn't say. There's a pillar, it's obvious. So whether it touches the ground or it's just up there, we don't know. It doesn't say. But at least it was clear enough for them to follow. And as Glenn says, in the desert you don't have any clouds. So whatever cloud appears, you can follow, you can see.
But it was big enough to block the Egyptian army because the cloud came in behind the Israelites, right?
If you read Exodus 14, the next chapter, the cloud came in between the Israelites and the Egyptians and separated them and blocked them. And blocked the sun, sorry. At least on their side it was dark, and on the side of the Israel it was bright, so it had some way of blocking the sun perhaps. Yeah. So it could have been a very tall cloud.
That's when sunblock was invented.
That was when sunblock was invented. Yeah, you can, well, I suppose you can imply that this cloud is not just a guide, but it's hope. It gives them hope that there is something beyond the desert. Yeah, it could be. Okay, now, example. How about Revelation? Beyond all these things that talked about, is there any other thing that you learned, you yourself? It could be different from person to person.
To me, 22 is Revelation.
22, yes, what does it say?
to me.
What does it reveal to you?
It's like God always guiding, and then, like you say, there's a hope, and you don't need to be afraid.
Yeah, you don't need to be afraid. God will
Guide
God will guide, yeah. And there's also the need to trust that this is indeed God's guidance, that is not leading me down the wrong road. Any other revelation to anyone?
verse 16. Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand.
Yes.
So from this, I know God is powerful.
God is powerful, yes.
Almighty. So whatever he wants to do, he can deliver.
Okay, whatever God wants to do, he is able to do.
He's able to do it.
That's
So
a,
we don't need to be afraid
we don't need
as
to
long
be
as we
afraid.
follow him.
We're not slaves anymore.
And so if we follow him, he doesn't want us to be slaves anymore. He wants to lead us out of Egypt, our own Egypt. So yes, the revelation about God, there's a teaching that God is powerful, that he will deliver us, and all we need to do is trust him and follow him.
God has a wonderful plan.
God has a wonderful plan, and he actually, as we know, he already planned it way back in Genesis 15. So it is a plan that he will execute, that he will put into place, yeah, and make sure it happens. He will execute his plan.
Also, when God takes us out of bondage, like out of Egypt, he just doesn't set us free. Go, "Hey, okay, there you go. There's this nice big world out there for you to explore. You know, he will actually give you specific things through his word to say, if you stick by these, I've got your best interest at heart. I'm going to develop you. I'm going to train you. I'm going to show you how to keep discipline so you don't revert to go back, or you don't get lost out there and you get destroyed, or you actually can't survive." And so that's sort of what I saw through, you know, the way he led through the desert, and the disciplines of your dedication of the firstborn and all that. All those things, they look like legalistic things to us, but they were really good guidelines for the people to follow, so they stay on course.
You might imagine if God were releasing the Jews, just like some people would release, see, like, they feel, you know, in Singapore, I was a Buddhist, and we used to have Buddhist ceremonies where you release animals and, you know, give them life. The whole idea is, in Buddhism, you do that, you get karma, good karma, you release life. So I can imagine just release, you open the cage and let them fly. You know, it's not my business anymore. You know, God could have done that, right? Open the cage and say, "Now go. It's your business now. Die, do or die. It's your choice." But God didn't say that, right? God actually went with them. "Follow me. I will be with you every step of the way. Follow my instructions, and I will tell you where to go." So it wasn't like open the cage and say, "Go." You know, you're free now to do what you want to do.
It's not freedom at all.
Yeah. So some people will say that's not freedom at all, right? And that is the irony of life, isn't it? That actually God did not release, as some people would hope. God says, "Open the cage, and now you're free to do anything you want. Do it your own way. I don't care." God says, "I do care what you do. I want you to be free to do the things I want you to do." Some people see that as another slavery. And indeed, the picture of the Bible, throughout the whole Bible, is this: we are not released as slaves of sin to be free to do what we want. We are released as slaves of sin to be slaves of God. But then Jesus says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." I'm not that kind of slave driver that Pharaoh was. I may ask you to do some hard things, but they are for your own benefit, your own health, your own good. Okay, so we are not released to be totally free to do what we want, because we really don't know what to do. When given the freedom to do what we want, a lot of kids say, "What do I do?" So I think we will be like that. Yeah. Okay. Right. What else do you learn about God or church? Or
I want to say that
yes.
God knows us very well, just like the back of his hand.
Yes. He understands our weaknesses, and he can then guide us very closely. Now I want you to turn with me to 1 Corinthians 10:13 first.
No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it.
Okay, so no temptation has overcome you except what is common to man. There are three things that this verse tells us. One, when we get tempted, it is nothing new. All human beings get tempted. Okay? So, you get tempted, I get tempted, all of us get tempted. It is common to humans. The second thing it tells us is God is faithful. He will not let us be tempted beyond what we can bear. We have a loving God who wants us to stretch our muscles of faith. When you stretch your muscles, you can do more. Okay, every Thursday I go out with Steve, I stretch my muscles. So I can do more. But sometimes you can overstretch your muscle. Then next day you are aching all over. So Steve makes sure I don't overstretch myself. I don't get muscle ache on Friday, because I have to stand up and teach the Bible on Friday. Yeah. So God is like that. God knows our weaknesses, knows our strengths. He stretches us, but He doesn't stretch us beyond the pain that we can bear. So that's the second. It's a promise, right? God is faithful. He will not let us be tempted beyond what we can bear. And the third thing it talks about here is that when we are tempted, He will provide a way out. It's like you're in a dark room and you're panicking, you're fearful, you don't know what to do, but the exit sign is very clear. Yeah, you go to the cinema, right? Everything is dark, you see the exit sign. It's the law to make sure the exit sign is visible. If there's any fire or whatever, panic, everybody runs for the exit. They know where the exit is. God says, I have already provided you the exit. When you're in trouble, look for the exit. Okay? So three things, three promises. And why do I say that? Because in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15.
For we do not have a high priest who is unable to emphasize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he didn't sin.
Okay, so this high priest is Jesus. So we have, you see, in the old days, in the Old Testament, they had a temple, and the high priest is the only one who can go into the holiest part of the temple to reach God. And Hebrews tells us no longer is that needed, because Jesus is our high priest. We don't need to have a high priest anymore. And Jesus, our high priest, is the one who goes in to speak with God. And He knows our weaknesses, so He's able to empathize, He's able to sympathize, He's able to enter our weakness. And we have Jesus Christ who understands us, so to speak. And why does He understand us? Because He was a man here on earth, and He was tempted in every way just as we are, yet He did not sin. So we have a man who was sinless, who was tempted like all of us, and yet did not fall to his temptation. He was able to apply the promise of 1 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 13. Whenever he was tempted, he saw the way out. And if we read the account of the temptation of Jesus in Matthew chapter 4, 3 temptations there, we know that every single one of those temptations, He rebuked, He scolded the devil. He turned away the devil by quoting the Bible. So it also tells us we should memorize the Bible, so that when we are tempted like Jesus, we can quote the Bible back to the devil and say, no, this is what God's word says, and I will not disobey God. So that is the reason what Jesus says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So here we are told that we should remember that Jesus has been tempted like us, and He will release us. So God understands our weakness, and that's the importance of that statement. Okay, I want to end here. There are many things perhaps you can share with others when you get a chance. I have 4 points I want to make before we end. The first point, of course, that what Dan said earlier on about telling the story, right? We need to tell our children the stories of God's working in our lives. because sometimes they may not learn the same things, but if we have learned it, we can teach them so they do not have to, what they say in English, reinvent the wheel. You know the idiom? Do not reinvent the wheel. It means that the wheel is already invented, don't go and invent it again. Don't do the same things that you don't need to go through. So if a mistake has been made by your parents, they tell you don't do it, listen to them. Don't go and suffer the same mistake. Yeah? Yeah. Why do you want to suffer the same mistake? Do not reinvent the wheel. So we tell our children stories of God's working in our lives to encourage them, and so that they don't have to suffer the things we suffered. Secondly, I think we need to keep sin away from our lives. The unleavened bread for 7 days. It's symbolic. You don't just keep sin away for 7 days, right? You know, just remember that every year there is this big celebration that the Jews went through to remind them that they have to keep away from sin. And we should try and remember that all our lives. The third thing is, I think it will be tough, but we should try as we can to set aside the first. And of course the first sometimes is the best for God's use. Willingly, sometimes perhaps even sacrificially. And whether it is the first of our salaries, the first of our children, the first of whatever we get from God, I think we should learn to have that discipline of giving the first and the best to God first. And finally, I think to commemorate what we said earlier on, the Jews were asked to commemorate the release from Egypt. I think we should remember and commemorate Jesus' death for us on the cross. And one of the things we do every so often in People's Church is once a month, in some churches it's every Sunday, we have Holy Communion. As Christians, we have a ceremony whereby we remember the death of Christ for us. We constantly remember that He is there to give us strength to break away from our sins.